Imagine a world where accepted history, taught for nearly 2 millennia, is merely a carefully edited version, omitting the most explosive details. What if, beneath centuries of doctrines, meticulously constructed dogmas, and deliberate silence, lies a forbidden truth so fundamental and dangerous that its revelation could shake the pillars of faith, topple entire dynasties, and challenge the very essence of ecclesiastical authority? This hypothesis, if proven, would not only alter our understanding of the past, but also the very structure of our modern worldview, forcing a reevaluation of every aspect of spirituality and power. A question that sounds simple, yet echoes like thunder through the quiet, dusty halls of history, has the power to shatter established perceptions. What if Jesus of Nazareth, a figure around whom entire civilizations have been built, left behind not only a spiritual legacy, but also biological descendants, specifically daughters? This audacious thought, a mere whisper in academic circles, could hold the key to understanding one of Western civilization's greatest mysteries. This inquiry will attempt to listen to that faint whisper, one that official history has tried so diligently to silence. We will endeavor to uncover and piece together fragments that, by all accounts, were never meant to be forgotten. This is not about symbols, allegories, or metaphors, but about real daughters of flesh and blood, born into a world seemingly entirely unprepared to accept their existence. These heiresses, in whose veins, according to tradition, flowed both ordinary human blood and the breath of divinity, would represent the living embodiment of a unique covenant, continuing through generations. For a moment, imagine the profound implications such a stunning truth could have for all humanity. The faith we know and practice today was shaped not only by carefully selected and preserved memories and teachings, but also, perhaps, by what was deliberately erased from the annals. In the long corridors of early Christian councils and numerous synods, such as the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD or the Council of Chalcedon in 451 AD, the history of Christ was systematically narrowed, pruned, and sculpted until it took the form we now recognize. Every inconvenient fragment, every potential mention of family or descendants, was meticulously and quietly buried beneath accumulating layers of theological dogma so as not to disrupt the emerging orthodoxy. Yet, despite all efforts at concealment, this whisper does not fade. It continues to seep through the cracks of forbidden texts. Its echoes can be found in the margins of apocryphal gospels, such as the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Philip, or the Gospel of Thomas, which were rejected and declared heretical. It manifests in subtle yet preserved symbols in early Christian and medieval art, as well as in ancient legends and myths. This whisper is not merely about some lineage of kings or prophets, but specifically about daughters, about hidden children whose very existence could radically disrupt the carefully constructed balance of power and spiritual authority of that era. A natural question arises: why would daughters, rather than sons, be so dangerous to the nascent ecclesiastical hierarchy? The answer lies in the peculiarities of the ancient world, where a daughter was simultaneously an invisible and unstoppable force. Her name was typically easily erased from official records. Her face was absent from the chronicles of patriarchal societies. Yet, it was through her womb that the lineage would continue unbroken, ensuring the continuity of the heritage. She represented a hidden thread, silently but inexorably weaving through the fabric of history. It was a secret legacy that was virtually impossible to eradicate completely, even when her name was struck from the pages of collective memory, as biological succession remained inviolable. Some researchers believe that this paradoxical nature of the female line was the reason for the profound fear the early church felt toward such an idea. To acknowledge the existence of Jesus' daughters would mean acknowledging that his divine authority was not limited to sacred scriptures or sacraments, but continued to live in the flesh, walk among people, and be passed down through the veins of women, who by their nature could not be fully controlled by institutional methods. And for this reason, if they indeed existed, these daughters had to be erased from history. Erased not only by direct violence, but by a far more sophisticated and effective method: silence and oblivion. The most effective form of oblivion is often not direct destruction or annihilation, but omission and silence. It was enough to remove their names from records, omit their stories from official narratives, sow doubt about the very possibility of their existence, and soon the world would inevitably forget them. However, memory, as history shows, is never completely lost. Here and there, in the most unexpected places, faint, barely discernible traces remain. It might be an image secretly carved into the stone of an ancient temple, or a story whispered among heretics and hidden sects. It could even be a subtle symbol, skillfully woven into the folds of a Madonna's robe in a medieval fresco. Each of these clues is fragile, each fragment disputed and questioned, but together they begin to form the outline of an alternative history that stubbornly refuses to disappear. In the course of such investigations, touching upon deep historical mysteries, the value of every opinion and every manifestation of interest in the non-obvious aspects of the past is undeniable. The dissemination of such hypotheses and their discussion among interested parties contributes to a broader understanding of history's hidden pages. A comprehensive understanding of all nuances of this investigation, as well as an acquaintance with its final conclusions, requires careful consideration of all presented information. Only a full grasp of the facts and hypotheses presented will allow for a comprehensive understanding of this issue, and the final conclusions will be presented in the concluding part of the narrative. Is it possible that the true Holy Grail, the subject of so many legends and quests, was never a golden chalice, but something far more precious and alive, a lineage of daughters? Could it be that even now, in our own time, somewhere in the forgotten genealogies of old Europe, in the blood of ancient aristocratic dynasties, or in the lives of ordinary people who never realized the full weight and significance of their inheritance, the daughters of Christ continue to live, bearing this secret and sacred burden? No one can answer this question with certainty, but tonight we intend to follow this intriguing whisper. We will journey to shadowed places where elusive memory and ancient myths inextricably intertwine, where long-established history unexpectedly bends into a deep, alluring mystery, and where the most crucial question still awaits its answer, buried beneath centuries of silence. What if humanity's greatest secret was not that Christ lived, but that his daughters managed to survive and continue his legacy? If Christ indeed left a family, where did they disappear to? It is known that history is written by those who remain in power, and power, by its nature, often prefers to forget or rewrite what does not serve it or threatens its legitimacy. A lineage directly descended from Jesus, and especially one passed through daughters, would pose an existential threat to the early Christian Church, whose power and authority were based on the strict idea that salvation and grace could only be obtained through the mediation of priests, bishops, and ultimately the Pope. Living heirs of Christ, especially female ones, would be something the Church could not control. A living heir, a bearer of sacred blood, would not require permission from Rome or any other ecclesiastical authority to claim spiritual or even secular power, which would undermine the entire nascent hierarchy. Their very existence would automatically challenge the Church's monopoly on divine mediation. Imagine the scene: a woman, a daughter of Christ, standing in a town square, her very existence an irrefutable refutation of the entire power structure built in her Father's name. Her blood would be her own gospel, her body a living vessel of an unbreakable covenant, requiring no ecclesiastical rituals or ceremonies. And so, the poignant question arises again: if such individuals truly existed, what became of them in the face of such powerful opposition? Some ancient traditions whisper of exile and secret flight. According to these hypotheses, Christ's family may have been secretly spirited away from the Holy Land, transported across seas and deserts by loyal and devoted followers who well understood that Jerusalem and its environs were no longer a safe haven after the destruction of the Temple in 70 AD and subsequent persecutions. They likely vanished into obscurity in distant lands, where their names were changed, their history meticulously suppressed and distorted until the world forgot who they truly were. However, oblivion, as we have already seen, is never complete. Just as the receding tide leaves behind scattered shell fragments on the sand, so too does history, despite all attempts to erase the truth, always leave behind tiny but significant fragments of truth. It is the Apocryphal Gospels, those very texts declared heretical and hidden away from the eyes of the faithful, that sometimes contain subtle hints of a lineage quietly continuing through unnamed figures. These lines of inheritance are like faint tracks on ancient soil, repeatedly erased, yet still visible to those with enough knowledge and skill to look closely. And notably, in the medieval world, this idea resurfaced in the form of mysterious whispers and secret codes. The legends of the Holy Grail, which so captivated the imaginations of knights and poets, speak not only of mystical chalices and cups, but also of lineages, of sang ral, royal blood, which literally translates from Old French as holy blood. This is a direct indication that the true Grail might not have been a relic, but a living line of descendants carrying a sacred heritage. A number of researchers lean towards the idea that the essence of centuries-long quests was not the discovery of some material relic, but the search for a family, a dynastic branch, a line of descendants shrouded in such profound secrecy that its existence could only be hinted at through allegories and secret signs. A natural question arises: why should this branch have vanished so completely into obscurity? The answer lies in the realities of the ancient Mediterranean, where bloodlines served as the cornerstone of the entire social structure. Monarchs ascended thrones based on the inviolable right of blood. Spiritual leaders asserted their authority by tracing their lineage back to ancient prophets, and powerful dynasties reached the heights of glory or fell into oblivion based on the strength of their blood heritage. The hypothetical acknowledgement of Jesus having daughters would mean that his divine legacy did not end with his crucifixion. It would continue to flow in veins, passed down from generation to generation, remaining a hidden yet living manifestation of his essence. For the nascent ecclesiastical hierarchy, such a thought was absolutely unacceptable. Its claims were founded on the assertion of its own exclusivity as the sole conduit and guardian of divine authority. However, the existence of a direct, living line of descendants would completely nullify these claims. No cleric, no prelate, no pontiff could even conceive of competing with the sacred authority of one who was a direct bearer of the same blood as the Savior himself. It was for this very reason that their narrative was erased from the annals. Church councils categorically rejected and anathematized any writings that even slightly touched upon Christ's human nature, mentions of his family, or hypothetical heirs. Such texts were declared heretical, their creators persecuted and forgotten, and their followers and entire communities annihilated. Female descendants, if they existed, vanished into the silent shadows of history. Yet even the deepest shadows can leave faint outlines. What if their female descendants, unofficially, became spouses of monarchs, silent progenitors of noble European families? What if their true names did not appear as direct daughters of Christ, but their destinies were encoded within the vast genealogical trees of Europe? Their sacred secret was passed down by word of mouth, preserved in the deepest silence. The mere absence of mention of a lineage does not serve as irrefutable proof of its non-existence. On the contrary, this circumstance may be the most compelling evidence of its former grandeur. For what other truth could possess such power and pose such an obvious threat as to demand complete eradication from historical memory? Thus, we are left only with the faint whispers of tradition. It is quite probable that the sacred lineage of Christ was never entirely destroyed. Perhaps it was merely meticulously hidden from prying eyes, awaiting the day when the world would be ready to rediscover what was once strictly forbidden and consigned to oblivion. Among all the New Testament figures, like a shadow lurking at the very edge of a great mystery, the figure of Mary Magdalene stands out. For some, she appeared as a repentant sinner, a woman whose soul was delivered from darkness by the boundless mercy of Christ. For others, she was the true apostle to the apostles, entrusted with the first and most important revelation of the Savior's great resurrection. However, behind these vastly polar and contradictory images lies another, far deeper role. Only whispered about in so-called heretical texts, subtly hinted at in ancient legends, this role was, by all accounts, too dangerous for the official church to ever permit or acknowledge: the role of wife, mother, and, most importantly, bearer of a sacred bloodline. The canonical Gospels provide very sparse information about Mary Magdalene. They reduce Magdalene to the role of an ordinary follower, a witness, no more than a background figure whose significance flares brightly for a moment at the empty tomb, then fades again into the shadow of other events. However, those Gospels that were rejected and declared apocryphal speak of her in a completely different, much more expressive voice. In the Gospel of Philip, an ancient manuscript buried in the sands for centuries until its miraculous rediscovery in Nag Hammadi, Mary Magdalene is presented not merely as an ordinary disciple, but as the one whom Christ loved more than all the others, the one whom he often kissed. Traditions state that the other apostles felt envy towards her exceptional closeness with the Savior. A number of researchers tend to interpret these mentions as pure metaphor, indicating a deep spiritual intimacy. However, others dare to ask the question that the official church never wished to voice aloud. Were their relations something far greater than merely a spiritual connection? If we assume that Christ and Magdalene were joined in a sacred union, then she may have been not just a witness to his earthly journey, but a living vessel for its continuation, a mother who carried the future of his precious lineage in her womb. Such a hypothesis fundamentally alters all traditional understanding of history. Through centuries, Magdalene's image has oscillated between the poles of repentant sinner and exalted saint, but rarely has she appeared in the role of an equal companion or partner. The status of a wife would have elevated her to a central figure in the entire history of Christianity. She would have become the very axis around which all of its spiritual and, possibly, bloodline heritage revolved. And if she indeed bore him offspring, if she gave him daughters, then her meticulous erasure from historical chronicles was dictated not merely by misogyny, but by an urgent, strategic necessity. Indeed, one need only imagine how different the world would appear if her true story had been preserved and brought down to our days. Imagine a Christian tradition that equally honored not only the divine masculine, but also the sacred feminine, embodied in the mystical union of Christ and Magdalene, and passed down to their daughters, who would represent both the continuation of his bloodline and the sacred power of femininity. However, the course of history took a completely different direction. Instead, Magdalene's image was reinterpreted and reduced to a repentant harlot, a figure carrying shame, not authoritative power. This derogatory image, notably, was never directly mentioned in biblical texts, but was actively preached by Pope Gregory the Great in the 6th century, and has since become firmly entrenched in Christian tradition. With a single sermon, her potential, fateful role as companion and mother was buried under centuries of stigma and condemnation. Yet, her true essence never completely dissolved into oblivion. In the lands of southern France, legends still persist of a mysterious woman who arrived by boat, carrying with her a faint whisper of sanctity. Traditions state that she spent the remainder of her days in the secluded caves of Provence, dedicating herself to prayer and sorrow until her death. However, some versions of this ancient story add a crucial detail that the official church chose to omit. She did not arrive alone. She came with a child, a daughter, or perhaps more than one child. If these traditions contain a grain of truth, then Mary Magdalene's role extended far beyond merely witnessing the resurrection. Her mission was to carry Christ's very life, carefully hidden in the veins of her descendants. The official church may have sought to completely consign her story to oblivion, yet on the picturesque hills of France, in the mysterious symbols of the Black Madonna, and in the meticulously coded legends of the Grail, this sacred secret continued to live. Who was she truly, a repentant sinner, an exalted saint, or the mother of a hidden sacred lineage? Perhaps she was all of these simultaneously, intricately woven into a single narrative that was too dangerous to be openly recorded by the pen of history, yet too powerful to be completely erased from humanity's memory. Considering the central role Mary Magdalene might have played, a natural question arises. Why do official church chronicles maintain such profound silence about it? The answer likely lies not so much in what was stated, but in what was deliberately omitted. The early Christian church was by no means an impartial custodian of historical evidence. It was a nascent organization, actively consolidating its power establishing dogmatic foundations and determining whose memory would be preserved and whose consigned to oblivion. And in this process, silence served as its most formidable weapon. In the first centuries after Christ's earthly departure, Christian communities were characterized by significant diversity, disunity, and frequent internal disagreements. Some adherents firmly held to the position of a purely spiritual Christ, seeing him as a divine being untouched by earthly needs of the flesh. Others, conversely, emphasized his human essence, his blood ties, and family bonds. In the context of these competing theological views, the idea of Christ as a husband and father did not seem incredible at all. It was just one of many stories actively circulating throughout the ancient Mediterranean. However, as the Church began to consolidate its power, such narratives started to be perceived as a direct threat. At significant councils, such as Nicaea in 325 AD, where bishops gathered by imperial decree to determine the future of Christianity, unity was valued significantly higher than literal truth. Texts that contradicted the chosen official narrative were decisively condemned. Writings that focused too much on Magdalene or too openly spoke of hidden heirs were declared heretical and ruthlessly discarded. By suppressing the possibility of Christ's family, the Church secured something vitally important for itself: exclusivity. Power, in its design, could not belong to daughters who remained invisible and uncontrollable. It had to emanate through bishops, popes, and priests, men tasked with mediating between the heavenly and earthly realms. However, this enforced silence was not perfect. Here and there, faint, barely audible echoes of other narratives continued to seep through. The Gospel of Mary, a text discovered in a papyrus codex, presents Magdalene not merely as a follower, but as a teacher of secret wisdom, one who comforts the disciples after the crucifixion. Her words carry authority. However, Peter disputes her role, insisting that Christ would not reveal such things to a woman. The text breaks off in the middle of a scene, leaving the reader to wonder what else was excised from the narrative, what more might have been said about her true role. This silence was no accident. It was a carefully planned strategy. To erase such a threatening truth, it is not enough to simply deny its existence. It was necessary to replace it with something else. This is why Magdalene's image underwent a radical reinterpretation. From then on, she ceased to be a teacher of secret wisdom or a potential companion of Christ, transforming into a repentant sinner. Her name was forever associated with shame and disgrace. The Church's silence was deafening, yet paradoxically, the more fiercely this silence was enforced, the more curious and telling the gaps in official history became. The question arises, why did it take such significant effort to destroy this truth? Why such persistence in promoting only one single version of her story? Is it possible that this very silence serves as proof? Proof that the truth was not merely forgotten, but deliberately concealed. Within monastery walls, whispers might have been preserved. In remote villages, legends were likely told around campfires, and in symbols carved in stone, depicted in frescoes, and passed down through secret societies, the possibility of Christ's daughters persisted, awaiting the day when Rome's silence would finally be broken. For silence is never eternal. It can conceal, suppress, bury, but it cannot destroy. Somewhere deep, beneath the layer of ash from forgotten texts and the weight of dogmatic assertions, the story of Christ's hidden lineage still smolders, awaiting its hour. If Rome attempted to silence this narrative, where can we still catch its faint echoes? They are found in the Apocrypha, in those Gospels that were rejected, declared heretical, and meticulously hidden away. These are voices that manage to seep through the cracks of orthodox doctrine, fragile yet surprisingly persistent, whispering of possibilities that the official church dared not canonize. The Gospel of Mary is one such remarkable text. In it, Magdalene appears not merely as a follower, but as a figure who comforts and instructs other disciples. Peter, however, openly resists her authority, questioning, did he really speak privately with a woman and not openly with us? Her role here is that of a leader, a close confidant, whose intimacy hints at something more than just a disciple-teacher relationship. The Gospel of Philip goes even further in its descriptions. It characterizes Magdalene as Christ's companion, loved above all others. The text mentions that he often kissed her, and describes the apostles' jealousy, who wondered why she was given such exceptional preference. Was this connection purely spiritual? Perhaps. But then why the jealousy? Why such insistence that she received revelations inaccessible to others? These texts do not directly mention daughters, but in the gaps, in the silence, in the metaphors, some researchers detect a faint hint of a family's existence. If Mary Magdalene was a companion, if she was loved above all others, then it is not impossible that she could also have been a mother. The word companion, in its original language, carries meanings of intimacy, partnership, and even marital connection. Other apocryphal works, such as the Acts of Philip, the Gospel of the Hebrews, Pistis Sophia, speak in allegories and fragments, invariably elevating,